بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So yesterday we kind of went over a few things from Imam al-Ghazali's understanding, or let's say approach to understanding the Qur'an, and he kind of divides it into the themes, kind of a thematic approach of the verses of the Qur'an. And we mentioned that the overarching or main theme of the Qur'an is so that you can know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through that, the Qur'an also directs us how to read the signs, not just in the Qur'an, but also in creation. And we mentioned some of the verses. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَاتِ. Do they not see إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْمُتَوَسِّمِينَ. In this there are signs for those who can discern. فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. Have i'tibar, seek the ibra, or the moral clarity or lesson for what you see. And all those things are actually directed to us how to نقرأ الواقع. How do we read the creation and read the reality? And the Sharia in general tells us to put away our awham and our delusions. And basically a delusion is you think reality to be something and it's actually not that. And from kind of a mental health perspective, this is what often gets in the way of happiness and understanding is our delusions. And anxiety is kind of a delusion. It's being troubled about something that may or may not happen in the future. And that's not real then. And the Qur'an talks about this in some degree. إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ لَهُمُ الْبُشْرَى فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِكَلِمَاتِ اللَّهِ. The awliya of Allah, لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. So they have no fear, in other words, anxiety about the future. وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Nor do they grieve over the past, because the past is gone. You can't really relive it. You can't bring it back. You can address the mistakes of the past to inform your present, but it's not like you can relive the past. And the future is not guaranteed, right? Which is the khawf. Sometimes it's called ham. Ham is about the future, and gham is grieving over the past. So we should be in the moment, right? And the moment means whatever particular moment that you find yourself in. And we talked a little bit about one of the questions during Fajr. If you're in a moment of obedience, then ta'zeem al-minna, attribute that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A moment of disobedience, alayka bil-istighfar wa tawbah, then seek forgiveness and repentance. If you're in a moment of bliss and na'im, ash-shukr, gratitude, and if you're in a moment of trial and tribulation, as-sabr, patience and forbearance. So the believer, is handling and engaging with every moment of their life, which is essentially tajalli, a manifestation of Allah's beautiful names and attributes, and then that's becomes your reality, and it's kind of a beautiful reality, to the degree that some said that there are jannatan, even Surah Al-Rahman, the jannatan, the two gardens, are the one of the next life. Jannat al-Na'im, Jannat al-Khuld, and the one of this life, Jannat al-Ma'arif, the Jannah of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they are linked in the sense that the Jannah for some in the next life will be a Jannah of Ma'arif, will be a Jannah of truly knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that culminates in the beatific vision, al-Nazar ila wajhi al-Kareem, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. Right? لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا, those who practice ihsan. What did they get? Al-Husna, al-Jaza' min jins al-amal. So they get, for their ihsan, they get hasan, they get husna. Wa ziyada, and extra. And they said the ziyada, ba'd al-mufassirin, is the nazar ila wajhi al-kareem, is gazing upon the countenance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for some people, Ghazali mentions that's all they're going to do. So for some, he even says that يعني عامة الجنة للبله, right? وأكثر أهل الجنة البله. And that means for general people who are enticed by القصور والحور, by the palaces and the حور العين and those descriptions in Jannah, then that motivates them. And then for others, as the Qur'an is addressing all of humanity, not just one segment, they're going to be busy with praising of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and gazing upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a manner commensurate with His majesty and in a way that only Allah knows right now. But it will be real, it will be haqiqi. It's not going to be imagined or figurative, it will be a real gazing upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way we don't know, in a way that Allah will manifest and yet to create in the next life if He grants us that, inshallah. So, Ghazali, back to what he said. So the Quran basically is showing you, teaching you, is inviting you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost. Then we talked about the levels of Tawheed al-Af'al. So to see the oneness of all of the acts, that they all ultimately return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that those acts are a manifestation of His names and attributes, that by which we know Allah, Tawheed al-Asma' al-Sifat. And then ultimately all that goes back to Tawheed al-Dhat, to the oneness of God. And it's said that the Prophet ﷺ in his supplication in sujood specifically, he had one where he said, Allahumma na'udhu bika min mu'afatika, bi'mu'afatika min uqubik, wa biridaka min sakhatik, wa bika mink. So I seek refuge from your iqab, from your punishment, with your afu or your mu'afat, by your pardoning. And I seek refuge from your rida, from your sakhat, from your wrath, by your rida, by your contentment. So the first one, mu'afat and uquba, that's af'al. Those are divine acts that Allah can punish or that Allah can pardon. That's a divine act. The second one, وَرِضَاكَ مِنْ سَخَطِكَ, and from with your rida, with your contentment, being content with us, min sakhatik, from your anger or wrath with us. Those are attributes. وَبِكَ مِنْكَ, هذا that, which is, يعني, subhanAllah, وَبِكَ مِنْكَ, and I seek refuge with you from you. I seek refuge with you from you. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, right? فِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, they said run to Allah. Run to Allah from what? Usually al-firar min shay. Like the other verse, فَرَّت مِنْ قَسْوَرَةٍ, running from a lion. But فِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, what does that mean? They said, فِرُّوا مِنْ كُلِّ شيء إِلَى اللَّهِ. Flee from everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the realization, عند توحيد الذات, seeing the oneness of the essence of God, لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. We cannot properly show gratitude for you. You are to be praised as you have praised yourself. That's like the realization or the tahqiq of bika mink. Bika mink. وَنَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْكَ, and we seek refuge from you, with you from you. لا نحصي ثناء عليك. فالله سبحانه وتعالى في الحقيقة هو الحامد والمحمود. So in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one doing the praising and He is the one praised. So He says the Quran invites you to this, invites you to al-mad'u ilayhi, namely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then underneath that, it talks about طريق السلوك, how do we get there? وتبت إليه تبتيلا إن الناشئة إليه أشد وطن وأقوى مقيلا وتهجد من الليل نافلة لك عسى أن يبعثك ربك مقاما محمودا. So forth. These are things we can do. قل الله ثم ذرهم في خوضهم يلعبون. Say Allah, then leave them into their frivolous things. You know, each one of these things is asl min al-usul. You could write an encyclopedia about it. And in fact, the ulama have. They can take just قل الله ثم ذرهم في خوضهم يلعبون. It's a manhaj, right? It's a methodology. It's a madrasa. It's a school. It's an understanding. قل الله ثم ذرهم في خوضهم يلعبون. Say Allah, then leave them in their frivolous talk. Or طلب إلى النظر وفي ذلك آية للمتوسمين من خلق السماوات واختلاف الليل والنهار. Manhaj. How do we look at the earth? How do we view creation? How do we understand? How do we make our way towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You could say that many, many verses, maybe perhaps even close to the majority, that's what it's inviting to. And the verses that actually speak about al-ahkam, right, which is like al-fara'id, al-mirath, inheritance law and things like this, dietary law, talking about ritual acts, Sawm Ramadan, are few compared to all those rest of the verses. So Al-Ghazali counts it as like the second, al-qism al-thani, the second category of verses. I don't think we got to the third yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. So there's actually like 10, so I'm going to try to get through them and then look to the rest, some of the verses. So the third one, he says, تعريف الحال عند ميعاد الوصال, right, which is what happens at the end of the day. What does it look like? And this is both for the believers and for the non-believers. For example, he brings the verse, كلا إنهم عن ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون ثم إنهم لصالوا الجحيم. أعاذنا الله من ذلك. So on that day, they will be mahjub from their Lord. They will be veiled from their Lord. And he says this is the real azab. Right? We tend to think of hellfire as like burning flames and heat, and that's also, there's a bit of allegory in that because it's nothing like of the dunya. But the real azab is the isolation, or to be veiled from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the real na'im is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and see Him, then the real azab is to be isolated from that. كلا إنهم عن ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون ثم إنهم لصالوا الجحيم. Then صالوا الجحيم. But first, this hijab, this veiling from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he talks about what he calls it فريقين. فريق في الجنة وفريق في السعير. So a fariq, a group for paradise, and a group for hellfire. And this is referred to also as al-wa'd wal-wa'id, as we said, as the promise and as the possibility of threat. And Sidi Fuad said something very beautiful this morning, some of you weren't here, that his mother related to him, that I relate on the authority of Fuad, that he heard from his mother, that she said to him when he was fearing, and I might have the riwayah wrong, so we have the actual original rawi here, that when he was thinking about hellfire and how bad it is, and he got very afraid, and she saw that he was distraught, and then she said to him, you don't have to worry about that. He said, why don't I have to worry about that? Because you see how much that I love you. Well, Allah loves you more than that. صحة الرواية هكذا؟ رواية بالمعنى. Not exact words, but kind of the meaning. وهذا يجوز أصلا. So Allah loves us more than we can imagine, right? And read the Qur'an. He shows you who He is. يريد بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. So إذا كان على مستوى اليسر والعسر, if it was on the level of yusr and usr, of ease and hardship, not even punishment and anything like that, لا يريد. لا يريد. يريد بكم اليسر. He seeks for you or desires for you ease, and He does not desire for you hardship. So if Allah desires for us ease and doesn't want for hardship, then it's not, He's not a vindictive God. You can't offend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can't harm Him. Some people I meet, they have this image of, I think Allah's really mad at me, so He's going to punish me. He doesn't get mad at you. Right? He's not an anthropomorphized. That's not Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala نور السماوات والأرض. هو منور السماوات والأرض. He gives light to everything. And it's for you, not for Him. We can't add anything to Him. We can't take away anything from Him. In fact, we cannot affect Him in any way whatsoever. So don't think Allah got mad at me, so He's going to do this. And we don't think of our trials and tribulations in this life as punishment. هذا دار ابتلاء وليس دار جزاء. Ibtila is different than jaza. Ibtila means Allah can test you, but it's not dar jaza. This concept of karma, like those YouTube videos and the guy's tailgating you and then he gets pulled over by the police and you yell at him, karma buddy, that sort of thing. Or sometimes people do it. شوف ربنا عمل فيك ازاي عشان انت عملت 1 2 3. شوف ربنا. You know, see what Allah did to you because you made fun of me that one time and stuff like this. It's not punishment. لو كان شيء هو ابتلاء. It's a test. Right? Allah is testing you. يبتليكم. So Allah doesn't desire for us to be harmed or desire for us to be punished. And He is أحن علينا, right? He has more hanan and more caring and nurturing for us than our own mothers. And that's difficult to imagine. But that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, وَسَبَقَتْ رَحْمَتِي غَضَبِي وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. And He mentions Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim 2 times in the Fatiha. All of this gives you the idea that this is not a vengeful or avenging God or seeks to personally punish us, but He is a merciful God. Right? He seeks for on us mercy. There was in some of the Abu Sa'ud in his tafsir, I mentioned this in Chicago, Ibrahim alayhi salam, there was a man, mushrik, يعني yushrik billah, doesn't believe in God or associates partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he was destitute. He didn't have money or food or anything. So Ibrahim alayhi salam says to him, وحد الله يعني وأطعمك. Say Allah is one and I'll give you something to eat. And the man refused. He said, لا, I'm not going to do that for food. ثم أوحى الله إليه. ثم Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Ibrahim alayhi salam, this person that you tied feeding him with tawheed, I did not do that to him. I have fed him and I have given him life and I gave him existence, and I did not do that to him. So he kind of rebuked Ibrahim for taking that stance with him. So Ibrahim alayhi salam goes back to the man and says, ala fikra, Allah said to me that I shouldn't have done that with you. Please have food with us. Doesn't matter. Inta muwahhid wala mushrik wala ishi. He said, your Lord said that to you? He said, yes. He said, this is a Lord worthy of being worshipped. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. So the moral of the story is, Allah arham mimma natasawwar. He is more merciful than we can even ever imagine. So think of your Lord in that way. And Allah says, في الحديث القدسي, أنا عند ظن عبدي بي. أنا عند ظن عبدي بي. I am at the good opinion of my servant. So if you think good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's good. If you think bad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فهذا يُعْدْ عليك. Then that will come back to you as bad. But في الحقيقة الأمر, for the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is, He's merciful. For have a good opinion of Allah. And when they say this concept, have a good opinion of Allah, yani have a good opinion of yourself and your circumstances and what Allah desires for you, and you will find your life will be easy or easier, right? We want to be people of bisata. We want people to be basit, not mu'aqqad, not complicated, not anxious about everything. Leave it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salim al-amr ila Allah. And the Qur'an is telling you this all the time. You can't pass a page of the Qur'an, literally, I believe, except that message is there. Salam amrak lillah. Because that's part of the mad'u ilay. That's how Allah is inviting Himself to Himself, or inviting us to Him. And this is a constant message. So, but it also has underneath this general rubric, this idea of hal and al-mi'ad wal-wisal, right? What happens at the end of the day? We know the end of the story. We just don't know everything in between. But live like you know the end of the story, because we know what the end of the story is going to be. So that's al-qism al-rabi', or the fourth. He says the fifth, fi muhajjat al-kuffar wa mujadalatihim. So this is the speaking to people who deny or disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I mentioned yesterday, it usually comes from 3 ways, as Ghazali mentions here. ذكر الله تعالى بما لا يليق به من أن الملائكة بناته or أن له ولدا وشريكا and so forth. So to speak about Allah, what they usually do is in ways that are not applicable to Him, that the angels are His daughters, or they had as a son, or things like that. So the Quran, yuhajjuhum, right? It's a clear proof against that. or talking about the Prophet ﷺ in a way that's not appropriate either, that he's a sahir, he's a kahin, he's a liar, denying his prophethood. And as we said yesterday, these are what's called ad hominem. So it's not really looking at the crux of the argument, but you are looking at where it's coming from. And this is considered to be a logical fallacy. You're in a very weak position, or the weakest position, when you can't actually speak to the argument that's presented before you, and all you can do is attack where it's coming from, or who's saying it, right? And the Qur'an tells us that we should seek the truth and qist, وَلَوْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ وَالْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ. Even if it's against yourselves, even against your parents, even against your relatives, but be on the side of haqq, on the side of qist, on the side of truth, side of justice. And then إِذْكَارِ الْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ, right? And then denying of the last day. So the denying of the hisab, the denying of an afterlife, وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرُ, so forth. That's the third type of batil, or false argument that is presented, that the Qur'an you'll see throughout speaking to that. فهذا القسم الخامس. القسم السادس, or the sixth one, he calls here في تعريف عمارة منازل الطريق وكيفية التأهب للزاد والاستعداد بأعداد السلاح الذي يدفع به سراق المنازل وقطاعها، وبيان أن الدنيا منزل من منازل السائرين إلى الله تعالى، والبدن مركب، ومن ذهل عن تدبير المنزل والمركب لم يتم سفره، وما لم ينتظم أمر المعاش في الدنيا لا يتم أمر التبتل والانقطاع إلى الله تعالى الذي هو مسلوك إليه. So basically he said this part is, how do we live this life? How do we go about living this life? And he said here, your body is your markab. Your physical body is what you are riding to get to the next one. So to be negligent or remiss of that is missing the point. We don't have this tradition of self-flagellation or jald al-dhat in Islam. We don't punish the body for the sake of punishing it. No, the relationship is ri'aya, right? And amana. The body is an amana, it's a trust. And there's ri'aya. When you have an amana, when you have a trust, you give it ri'aya, right? You take care of it. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ كُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَاعِيَّتِهِ. All of you are like shepherds, and all of you are responsible for their flock. So the physical body also is considered to be that. And your life, amr al-ma'ash, right? How you make a living, how you live, where you live, the people under your care, how you take care of them. And this also extends to what you eat, right? The Qur'an doesn't tell us kulu washrabu in a general sense, because we know to do that already. It's a basic instinct. But it will make intidam, right? It will put some order to that. كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ, for example, في الصيام. So eat and drink until you can distinguish between the black and white lines, not the literal, but in the horizon. Eat and drink until then. وَلَا تَقْرُبُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Right, so even with marital or sensual relationships, there's also rules. في الفرائض, right, mirath, inheritance law, there are certain rules. How to seek about a living, specifically transactional things between people, buying and selling. Right, Ayat al-Dain, the longest verse in the Quran. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا تداينتم بدين إلى أجل مسمى فاكتبوه. مثلا. Or you believe if you have some transaction between you and there is something that is not yet paid, what's called the debt, فاكتبوه, document it. وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ بِالْعَدْلِ. Right? And the one who's going to document it, let it be someone who's going to document with justice. Right? So these things are there حتى ينتظم أمر المعاش, as Ghazali said, so that our life will be easy to implement. And the basic premise for, like, for example, commercial law or transactional law is we don't create a situation where people can disagree and argue to the point of violence, right? And that's what happens. And the fuqaha, they say, البيع والشراء مبني أو مبنيان على المشاحة. Buying and selling is, by its very inherent nature, tenuous. There's tension there. Why is there tension? Because the buyer wants to pay the lowest price possible, and the seller wants to get the highest price. So they have different objectives. Completely different, in fact, opposite objectives. I want the lowest price, you want the highest price. They don't agree. But there are rules by which to help them to agree. So the market, right, or the type of value that people would put on this particular good or service is going to dictate how much I pay or how much I don't pay, or how much the seller receives or how much they don't receive. And that's part of Amr al-Ma'ash, right? That's part of living and mutual and exchange of mutual benefits and goods and services. And even Muslim rulers realized that, we have to add another layer called something called al-Muhtasib. So Muhtasib is-Suq used to be the person who just walk around and make sure nobody's price gouging or lying or selling a defective product and things like this. Why? حتى ينتظم أمر المعاش. So that's not really, it's a dunya thing, but it's pointing towards an akhirah. Just like to be, to have a relationship between man and woman only in marriage. حفظ النسب, right? The preservation of lineage, the preservation of family. This is the manner by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to live our life. SubhanAllah, I have to find it, but I read a New York Times opinion piece maybe last week, and it said something about this kind of very tense, almost strife-filled relationship between men and women, between the sexes, like in modern culture. And they said, maybe we're doing it wrong. I'm like, really? After all this, maybe you're beginning to think you're doing it wrong. Because they said, sorry for the children in the room, but for all of the emphasis on sex and things like this, people are having much less of it in the modern culture, and people are not getting along. And if you talk to people who are in that whole thing, especially women who have to deal with the dating culture, it's pretty miserable. It's a miserable existence. And people are all miserable about it. So for all of the talk about it, all of the flaunting, all of the pornography, all of the things that seem to be geared to making it something enjoyable for people, it's having the opposite effect. This is what this article was saying. And it said that people sometimes in the traditional marriage relationship are much, much happier and able to do their life. And I'm like, tell us something we don't know. I mean, we could have told you that. But sometimes what looks like freedom, what looks like liberation, what looks like, because it's built upon the wrong philosophy. And the modern philosophy of our culture is that freedom is doing whatever you want to do. Being allowed to do whatever you feel like you want to do. But the problem with that is we're not recognizing all aspects of our humanity. If we're left to do whatever exactly we want to do, it will lead to destruction, because there's a very ugly, animalistic, egoistic side of our humanity. But if we do what Allah wants us to do, we'll never go wrong. If we do what Allah commands us to do, and He knows us better than we know ourselves, how could we go wrong? How could that be a mistake? And ultimately, liberation and freedom is to be free from wants, free from desires that are destructive. If you are a slave of your own destructive desires, you're still a slave, right? If you're a slave to your Insta feed or to what other people think of you and to receiving praise and accolades and things like this, you're a slave to that. So the general premise is you're a slave to something, even whether you realize it or you don't realize it. So why not be better a slave to the one who is worthy of your servitude and worthy of your worship, namely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyway, so he goes into this thing about how dealing with marriage, with divorce, with commercial law. So all of this is kind of the general understanding of fiqh. Even in contending when things are difficult, dealing with war, the rules of jihad, all of those are explicated and talked about to some degree in the Qur'an, and obviously the Sunnah supports that. But again, it's all part of the verses or the ayat that deal with these particular facets of the Qur'an. So that's al-qism as-sadis. That's the sixth one. The seventh one is the sixth or the seventh, I said? The sixth. Or 6 and 7 is, or the seventh is Ahwal al-Anbiya wal-Awliya. So looking at the stories of the prophets and of people who are close to prophethood, like Maryam alayhi salam, like Ashab al-Kahf, and obviously the prophets, the 25 specifically mentioned in the Qur'an, including our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then also an indication in the Qur'an that there are some that you have been told about and some that you have not been told about. منهم قصصنا عليك ومنهم لم نقصصهم عليك. And some of the ulama say that there were 124,000 prophets. One riwayah says that. And of those, 313, approximately the same number of people who participated in Badr, were above and beyond prophets, were also messengers. And there's difference of opinion what a messenger is, but generally a messenger is someone who's also a prophet, but had a sharia or had a wahi, a revelation that they had to reveal or yuballighun, to convey to the people. So their stories, right, as Surah Yusuf says, مَا كَانَ حَدِيثًا يُفْتَرَى. It's not just a hadith made up, just some story, but there's a moral lesson in it, in each of the stories of the prophets. And look to the different ways that the story between Moses and Pharaoh is told in the Quran, at least 4 times, I think. Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Qasas, Surah Taha, and from different aspects. And also Iblis, la'anahullah, not prostrating as ordered by Allah, also told different times within the Quran in different ways. And like we said, it's not tikrar, it's not repetition, but each time there's like a nukta, right? There's something specific or a moral lesson in there to be learned from each specific instance of this. So the reason that we learn about the prophets and the messengers and the awliya is because there are exemplars. There are people for us to try to follow and to try to emulate and to try to be like, and to also consider all of the hardships that they had and all the difficulties that they went through. It's a place of solace for us. They say tasliya, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yusallina. He's giving us solace and tasliya for seeing all of these different prophets and messengers, and each one of them is like an archetype. Each one of them is like a story that is repeated. So the Pharaoh and the Haman and the Qarun, yes, were real people, individuals, but they're archetypes. In other words, you see they're types that you see repeated over and over again. So the tyrant and awan of the tyrant, and the people who are the batin, or the underlying layer of the tyrants, and Qarun, the haughty and arrogant. These are archetypes you see, these archetypes in humanity. And then you see those archetypes also in the different prophets. So we talk about Sabr Ayyub, we talk about the great forbearance and patience of Ayyub, and we see how the Quran describes the different prophets, right? Idris kana sadiq al-wa'd wa kana rasulan nabiyya, inna Ibrahim kana halim, Allahun halima, and so forth. So it shows you all of the specific different types of traits. And the Quran doesn't exactly explain to you, so why was Ibrahim called Halim here, and Idris Sadiq al-Wa'ad here, and Musa was called this thing here? That's up to you to open up, to be opened up to you. Some of the Mufassirun, some of the exegetes talk about it, but not that many actually. And there's different, you can think of it as different tajalliyat or manifestations of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifests His attributes to these different prophets in these different situations. Or like when Musa alayhi salam, he asked Allah, Arini anzur ilayk. Let me see you. I want to see you. قال لن تراني. Allah responds back to him, لن تراني, you won't see me. ولكن انظر إلى الجبل فإن استقر مكانه فسوف تراني. فلما تجلى ربه للجبل جعله دكا وخر موسى صاعقا. فلما أفاق قال تبت إليك. فلما أفاق وقع ساجدا وقال تبت إليك وإني من التائبين. So Musa wanted to see Allah. And here there's also things that the theologians reach at. So if Musa is asking Allah to see him, that means he's not asking for something impossible. And this was a point of contention in early theology between a group called the Mu'tazila and Ahl Sunnah. No prophet, knowing what they know about them, will not ask for something Allah cannot grant because they know Allah, unlike the way that we know Allah. But Allah responded back to him, لن تراني, يعني لن تراني في الدنيا. You will not see me in the dunya. If it was mutlaq, he would say, you will never see me. He could have said, لا تراني. You will not see me. لن here, نفي المستقبل. So لن means you're not going to see me in this instant or in this life. But he gave him something else. ولكن انظر إلى الجبل. But look to the mountain. He's showing him why you're not going to see him or how you can see Allah in this life. فإن استقر مكانه فسوف تراني. If it stays in its place, then you will see me. فلما تجلى ربه للجبل جعله دكا. However, when Allah tajalla, the same word tajalliyat, manifested on the mountain, it crumbled to pieces. That's how you see Allah in this life, via His tajalliyat. وهذا الأصل من الأصول, as we said. This is a foundation from which all of the Futuhat al-Makkiyya, you could say, is based upon that part of the verse. فلما تجلى ربه للجبل جعله دكا وخر موسى صاعقا قال إني تبت إليك. Right? He fell down into sujood and he said, إني تبت إليك. And I repent, not from asking something that was wrong, but asking for something perhaps that's more appropriate for the next life. And Allah showed him how to see him in this life. Understand the tajalliyat, understand that was a miraculous thing, obviously. But from the perspective of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, huwa sahib al-sha'n, everything is miraculous. The sun rising today in the east was miraculous. We just a'tadna dhalik, alifna dhalik. We got used to it. But if we had never seen a sunrise before, or had never seen a sunset before, we would think it would be miraculous. Oh, wow, how did that happen? That's amazing. Like it just goes down and comes up and seems, how can someone do that? And Ibrahim haja Namrud bihada, right? Ibrahim, when Namrud, the king, spoke to him, and he said that he's the Lord, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ فَأْتِي بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. Allah brings the sun from the east, why don't you bring it from the west if you're the Lord? فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. Buhit, yani sakat. He didn't have anything to say. What could he say? How can you claim uluhiyya? How can you claim to be the Lord? You can't, well, let's change this or change that. So, these sorts of verses and the mawaqif, the different situations that prophets had with Allah, and prophets had with their people, and prophets had with their followers. So when Musa alayhi salam is about to left Egypt, and he's to cross the Red Sea, and then his companion said to him, Inna la mudrakun. Khalas, we're done. Inna la mudrakun. They're right behind us, Pharaoh and Haman and their horses and their chariots and their weapons, and we have the ocean or the sea, the Red Sea in front of us. What could we do? Kalla inna ma'aya rabbi sayahdeen. Not to worry, was the response of Musa. Inna ma'aya rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord is with me, sayahdeen. He will lead us out. And then he cast his staff, and the Red Sea split, and they crossed, and Pharaoh perished, drowned in not the Nile, the Red Sea. Similar situation happened, also recounted in the Qur'an, between Muhammad ﷺ and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Quraysh. ثانية إذ هما في الغار إذ يقول صاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا. And you can compare the two مواقف. Here Musa عليه السلام إن معي ربي سيهدين. My Lord is with me, singular, سيهدين. Because no sooner did they cross the Red Sea and Musa was called to the burning bush, and then he comes back and he finds them worshipping a cow, a golden calf that they built from the gold that they took from Pharaoh and his people. What was the case with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What was the aftermath of Al-Ghar? لا تحزن إن الله معنا. Allah is with us. It's an ishara. Allah was with Moses, يعني حيث الهداية, but once he crossed the Red Sea, those people were not with Musa alayhi salam, who took the calf as to worship. Even the miracle just happened right in front of them. It's hard to fathom. How's that possible? You just saw it. You're like, and in fact, one of the Jewish kahana or sages, he was speaking to Ibn Abbas after the fitna that happened between the Sahaba. And he said, oh, look, it's your people. You know, sooner did the Prophet go, then they started fighting with one another and so forth. Ibn Abbas, Radda alayhi, he said, well, you guys, no sooner did you cross, your feet were still wet from crossing the Red Sea, and you started worshiping a calf. Well, that actually happened like that. Allah alam, that's, يعني, هزأوا, استاهل. So with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inna ma'a rabbi, inna la tahzan inna Allah ma'ana. Do not worry. La tahzan ya Sayyidi Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Inna Allah ma'ana. He is with us. With us. And that's kind of the theme of the Ummah al-Muhammadiyya. If you're with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, la tahzan. It's like a clarion call for everybody. Have no huzn. If you're with the معية of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, لا تحزن. هذا من الخصائص المحمدية. Right? And look at the verses in Surah Al-Anfal. وما كان الله يعذبهم وأنت فيهم. وما كان الله معذبهم وهم يستغفرون. Allah will not punish them and you are amongst them. And the Qur'an also tells us وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ Surah Al-Hujurat. Okay, put two and two together. If Rasulullah is with us, and Allah will not punish us as long as He is with us, فَأَيْنَ التَّعْذِيبُ? How could you say any of this is ta'ذيب? وَابْتِلَاء. It's a test. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبُهُمْ وَهُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. حتى كمان, not just Allah, the Prophet ﷺ is with us, but said istighfar. من الخصائص المحمدية of this ummah. يعني, most of the mercy of the ummah was reserved for this ummah, for the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, talking about the prophets and the messengers and their ahwal, these are things you can pick up and reflect on when you read the Qur'an. And then it also talks about ahwal al-a'da and the hudud and the ahkam and all those things that we mentioned, and those he counts them as 10 if you add those. So what I want to do with, we have about 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Huh? We have 5 minutes left? Okay. So this book is interesting because the first half is just describing these things, and then the second half it's translated in English also, if you're interested. But as you can see, then he just brings out all of the particular verses that fall within the categories. So when he says, النمط الأول جواهر القرآن التي ورد في ذات الله عز وجل من صفاته وأفعاله خاصة. So he goes through actually the whole Qur'an basically and says these are the verses that pertain to the that of Allah, His essence and His acts and His sifat and His attributes. The first thing he brings the whole of Surah Al-Fatiha. And that's why it's called Al-Fatiha. Fatiha al-Kitab, right? It's at the beginning, but it's also the Fatiha for everything. Al-Fatiha, wal-Waqi'ah, wal-Shafiyah, wal-Waqiyah. All of those things. وَسَبْعَ الْمَثَانِي. right? The great 7 verses, if we count them 7, some counted the Basmala as the first verse, some counted Alhamdulillah as the first verse, and then they said what would be the last verse is actually 2 verses. So, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. What is the first thing that we do before anything else? We invoke Allah's name and we praise Allah. Hada manhaj. That's like a way of doing life, right? These verses correspond to life. If you can't invoke Allah's name in the thing that you're about to do, then don't do it. If it's not worthy of saying Bismillah before you do it, then don't do it. We say, Bismillah. They said the Basmala, for those who are interested in Arab, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's kind of an interesting sentence because there's an omitted aspect. And Arabic sentences are of 2 types in general. Jumla fa'aliyya or Jumla ismiyya. Jumla fa'aliyya, or the verbal sentence, begins with a verb. ذهب زيد وعمر إلى المسجد, for example. ذهب, so it starts with the verb. Zayd and Amr went to the mosque. In English, you don't have that. Other languages put the verb all the way at the end, like Turkish. Right? So if you study a little bit of Turkish, it has all of these words, Zayd, Amr, mosque, and and went. So it leaves you like waiting. You have to pay attention till they finish their sentence. You can't just zone out in the middle of it.
You got in the Ottoman documents, like they go 2 pages and then the
German is a little like that too. But in Arabic, we can go either way. So we can have Jumla Fa'aliyya, ذهب زيد وعمر إلى المسجد مثلا. Or we can make it Jumla Ismiyya, عمر وزيد ذهبا. Now we have to say, because we have to bring the proper pronoun, because it's not at the beginning. عمر وزيد ذهبا إلى المسجد. And those 2 things don't mean exactly the same thing. There are slight differences in meaning. The Basmala could be either one, because there's no verb and there's no mubtada and khabar. It begins with a preposition. Bismillah. So by the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. What? That's the thing, right? You're waiting. So what would we do with that? Some of them said, اجعلها جملة اسمية أو اجعلها جملة فعلية. Right? You could say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, abtadi'u. Yani, by the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I begin. Or they say, al-afsah, whatever thing you're going to do, that's the verb. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, udarrisu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, akulu. Bismillah ar-Rahim, azuwaju. Ma hakada. So, whatever thing that you're going to do, then you add the verb at the end. Or you can make it jumla ismiyya. So, you would say at the beginning, ibtida'i, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Tadrisi, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Zawaji, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Right? The thing, my beginning is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My marriage is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My eating is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وهكذا. It's beautiful, right? You could just, it works in all of your different situations. And, most people, if you ask them, even students of knowledge, أعرب لي البسملة, it's higher. He doesn't know how to do it. Because it's not straightforward. It doesn't have the الفعل والفاعل والمبتدأ والخبر that you used to sing. All those 4 aspects are omitted. It's a unique type of sentence, right? And it's not even khabar. You can make it khabar, or you can make it insha also, من حيث البلاغة. So in balagha, we have this concept of jumla khabariyya or jumla insha'iyya. Jumla khabariyya is يحتمل الصدق والكذب. So something that it's a statement you make, or a truth claim, that could be true or not true. So if I say the sky is blue, that's a truth claim. Could be true or not true. You have to see if it's actually true or not. Versus where I say, is the sky blue? I'm asking a question. So it's not a khabar, it's insha. Or it could be sighat ta'ajjub in Arabic. Like, ma ajmal as-sama'. If I put ajmala, not ajmalu, ajmala, then it becomes mansub ala al-ikhtisas. Then I'm talking about ta'ajjub, sighat ta'ajjub. I'm saying, how beautiful is the sky? So I'm not informing you, I'm informing you of my feelings. And that's interesting, that the Arabs considered when you inform someone of your feelings, it's not a truth claim. Like, you can't come to me, oh no, you don't feel like that. No, that's what I feel, khalas, yani. I'm not asking you to believe me or convince you or not to believe me. I'm telling you this is what I'm feeling inside. So it's taken as true without having kind of an investigation, true or not. Like when you say, ma ajmal as-sama' ana ata'ajjab, right? I'm saying, how beautiful is the sky? Same thing with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I can make it insha' or khabar. So if I say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim ibtida'i, I'm beginning with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, then I am informing you this is my intention. Or law ala sabil al-insha', right? And I am I'm expressing how I feel. I'm not making a statement. I'm expressing how I feel, so then it becomes insha'. وهكذا. And sometimes they have al-khabar fi mawda' al-insha' wal-insha' fi mawda' al-khabar. One time, a long time ago, there was a mosque and I walk in and people are like arguing about something. And they're like, can we say rahimahullah or rahmatullah alayhi about, when someone passes away? When we say rahmatullah alayhi or rahimahullah, هذه جملة خبرية من حيث اللغة. From the Arabic language, it's saying literally, if we take it literally, Allah's mercy is upon him. Like I'm informing you of that. So these guys were arguing about, maybe we shouldn't say that because who knows if Allah is going to have mercy upon him or not. I didn't know much at the time, but had I known, I would have said, yeah, هذا إنشاء في موضع الخبر. رحمه الله المغفور له. All of that means أنا أدعو له. I am making a dua. والدعاء نوع من الإنشاء. So when you make a supplication, when you say, Ya Allah, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, I'm not informing you of something. I'm expressing something. I am seeking something. That's not about truth or false, true or not true. So same thing when you say rahimahullah, Allah yarhamu, rahmatullah alayhi, al-maghfur lahu. The traditional, pre-modern people, they didn't have to say ahsabuhu kadhalik. They didn't have to say, well, I think he's like that. It was understood from their speech. Like, rahimahullah, I'm obviously making a dua for him. I'm not informing you of what Allah is actually going to have mercy upon him or not. Because min qara'in al-ahwal, right, from the reading of the situation, I can tell what I mean by that. And they said the same thing, fa'al al-amr. Right, the dua is actually fa'al amr fi al-lugha. So when I say ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, it's like a command verb. Am I commanding Allah to do that? No, I'm asking him. So how do I know I'm asking and supplicating and not commanding him? Min haythu al-maqam, who's Allah and who am I? And they said if it's between min al-a'la lil-adna, it's a command. Right, from someone higher to someone lower, like parent to a child, then it's a command. I don't have to say, I'm commanding you, a'tini al-ma'. And I'm not, supplicating to the child and saying, if you please, no, I will get me some water, please. Yani. And then if it's peer-to-peer, it's called iltimas. So if we're peers, and I say to someone, a'tini al-microphone min fadlak, or give me the speaker. And then Omar responds, I'm not your servant. I wasn't commanding you. I'm asking you because we're peers. A'tini al-microphone, yani. There's no command here. Min qara'in al-ahwal, right, from the reading of the situation. So built into the Arabic language is a lot of this reading of the situation. And there are books that have been written about al-maskut anhu. Qism min al-Qur'an, al-maskut anhu, or al-mafhum, which means that which is understood from the Qur'an and not pronounced outright. Like here in the Basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's something else that is not mentioned, but you're supposed to figure it out. In other words, there's a little bit of effort that has to be extended, a little bit of mujahada. Reading the Quran is not a passive exercise, it's very active. right? Because obviously you're trying to read the words properly with tashkil and tajweed and so forth. That's just the outer shell, as Ghazali talks about. But then there's the inner aspect of it, is what is this saying to me in general, and what is this saying to me right now? And what is the effect it's going to have on me? To the effect, the last thing I'll say, the degree that some of the ulama said, when you have a session of reading the Qur'an or a session of dhikr, don't drink anything cold right after. Wait half an hour. And you're like, shmana, yeah, why? Because the ma'ani, the meanings take some time to simmer within you. And the meanings are hot. There's heat associated with it. So don't cool that down immediately by drinking something cold right after tilawah of Qur'an or right after dhikr. Because they have to, as I used the example in Chicago, when you do the Chemex and the coffee and you do the first pour, you have to let it bloom. Yes, you have to let it bloom. So let the meanings bloom a little bit and then wait. And then, you can go about your thing. There's like a simmering or let's call it tajalli hatta, that happens when you engage with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which includes the reading of the Qur'an. So our time is up.